And now, the Wad Fam Chalk Pod.
Hello and welcome to the Wad Fam Chalk Pod. I'm Dylan Weaver.
And I'm Andrew Sabo.
And this week we are joined by a returning guest, our most returning guest. This is his 5th appearance on our show. Woo! He is an expert in all things Bible and loves that I'm saying that right now. It's...
Drew Huber. I hate that you said
Christ.
that.
Yeah, no, I knew you would. That's why I threw it in there.
So kind of you.
Uh-huh. Welcome back to the show, Drew.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Still crazy that I am the most returning guest. Seeing as I'm not the most successful guest in terms of, listens, but I'll take it.
You're successful in our hearts, Drew.
And that's
always
what
been.
really matters.
From times before the pod, which we dare enter into.
Right.
Prehistory, if you will. Pre-pod history.
This is the thing, is you have a double-edged sword here, which is you're one of our friends for a very long time, and you have a specific angle that we can cater to in making this show.
That is true. That is helpful. And I live close by, which,
that certainly helps. I mean, we record remote.
Sure.
Even if you moved across the earth, we'd still track you down.
Wow. That's so kind of you. I'm glad that you would go to such great lengths.
If the podcast is over and you move across the world, we will start it back up just so we
Just
can
to
include
speak.
you.
That's very kind of you. I'm honored.
Thanks. Well, you're in the 5-timers club. That's just a part of the...
So far, the only one.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I get like a little I don't know, the equivalent
Membership
of a
card?
silver play button or something?
Have I given
It's actually
you...
a Sam's Club membership.
Oh, good. Okay.
Have I given you a sticker or a business card yet?
No, I don't think so.
You can have both if you'd like.
We can talk about that off air. I feel like that's
some merch
a private
reimbursement.
conversation.
Come on the show 4 times. Your 5th time, get a free T-shirt.
I mean, look, he is the inspiration behind one of our T-shirts.
That is
Amen.
true. Of which
Amen.
I have bought one on a meme. So
There you go. Get your Venmo for livestock shirts at tpublic.com/store/wadfamchalkpod.
That was very nice.
tpublic.com/store/wadfamchalkpod.
Fod.
Wadfam Chalkpod. I know the name of our show.
there you go. Yeah, you can just cut that in post.
Oh, I for sure can, except Andrew's laughing over it.
Isn't that all the more reason to cut it?
Oh
My
man.
goodness. What episode are we here to talk about today, Dylan?
Oh, we're talking about episode 416, The Tower. It's written by Doug McIntosh, who is famous for not writing a whole lot of Odyssey. But here he is. It's directed by Phil Lawler. He wrote 4 episodes. This is the last of the episodes that Doug wrote. And it's a Bible episode, which is why we have Drew on, because Drew's always on for a Bible episode. But previously we did Bernard, then we did an OT Action News last year, and then I pitched Drew a series of options this year. And this is the one you landed on. You wanna tell me how we arrived at this point, Drew?
You gave me a set of options. One of them I ruled out immediately.
Wait, can I please hear the options? Or
Okay.
is that allowed?
So the options was a Bernard
Okay.
episode. I believe it was Bernard and Saul.
Okay.
It was an OT Action News.
Okay.
I believe that was Jericho.
Yeah. There's only 2.
No, there's 4.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so it was an OT Action News, and then I pitched a club-only episode.
Oh, no.
Which was Phil Lawler's first episode when he comes back to the show. We'll maybe talk about it someday. Probably not, though, so I'll spoil it now.
Yeah.
It is fanfic about what if the disciples knew each other as children.
And just to clarify, the OT Action News you selected was Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's right. I meant Maximum Spice. I forgot.
Which would have also been good. But
That's right.
yes,
Siege of Jericho is an option, but I was like, what if I make Drew talk about Sodom and Gomorrah? And then the last option I gave him was The Tower, which would be his first episode covering an Imagination Station adventure. So
yes,
There you go.
yeah, and that's what you ultimately landed on.
it is.
And please correct me if I'm wrong. Is there not also an episode of Adventures in Odyssey about the Tower of London?
I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure there is.
Probably.
Because
Is
when
that
I
what
saw
you
the
thought?
title was The Tower, I was like, huh. Okay. I mean,
Yeah, I wanted
history,
to
cool.
talk about the Tower of London. Exactly.
Very cool prison, and if I remember the episode well, I enjoyed it, but no, we going way back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What was what was your experience like with an Imagination Station? You've had some Odyssey memory. Did you is Imagination Station something where you had context for? And what was your experience like listening to one such adventure today?
Sure. So I don't know if I actively remember listening to an Imagination Station before, but I at least remembered what the concept was. So I probably did at some point. I mean, I didn't mind it. I thought it was fun. Yeah, I feel relatively net neutral about the Imagination Station as a method for talking about the Bible. Better than Bernard so far.
Yeah.
Hard, but
I love Bernard, but I know your criticisms. I understand, but
Well, I feel like the problem that we ran into with Bernard was that it went back and forth between being radically dramatized for like gimmicks and then just like reading straight from the Bible. So it
Yes.
creates this really unclear picture.
exactly.
yeah, I have no problems with that. Look, go back and listen to our 3 episodes talking about Bernard, Bernard telling Bible stories. If you want all those takes, we don't need to rehash it here. I guess, yeah. So,
Any particular? So I mean, so we had Sodom and Gomorrah, Tower of Babel, and then what was the other?
Saul
And Saul. Okay.
and Jesus' disciple fanfic.
Oh, and how dare I forget the Jesus disciple fanfic? That would be the one I would have picked, but that's why I don't get asked.
Yeah, was that a draw to the source material or to the format?
I immediately ruled out the disciples
Fair.
as kids. I was. Maybe that's an episode for another time. I did not feel like I had the time to prepare for that mentally, emotionally, and
Spiritually.
Yeah, spiritually, literally. So I ruled that one out and decided that we would just try something different. I mean, we had done a couple Bernards and we did No Tea Action News, and both of those were fun for various reasons. But figured, you know what? Let's diversify. So decided to go for this one instead.
Cool. All right. Then I think I don't know anything else people want to say off the top, or I think we'll keep moving. Oh, I guess I should throw out that this episode originally aired November 21st of 1998. That was 2 days ago as we're recording. And 24 years ago, but
Sure, but the yearly timing is
correct. It's a
pretty
nice fall episode.
Love to see
And we're
it.
recording on a Wednesday. Odyssey originally aired on Wednesdays, like new episodes.
wow. How
I
great.
believe during this era, new episodes came out on Wednesdays. If I'm wrong, don't tweet at me because who cares?
Would now
Also,
be
Twitter might be dead.
Yeah, by the time this airs, Twitter might not be here.
Yeah, I've got bad feelings. Shout out to AJ for being the only reason I re-downloaded Twitter just to respond to his DMs.
Past and future guest AJ Diddy.
Love to see it. Now would be an excellent time, barring Dylan's permission, to talk about the fact that this episode has an incredible cast.
Oh yeah, we can talk about cast if we feel like it. We can also hit it as it comes, but
That's fair.
I think most notably, we have Earl Bowen as Nimrod, who is the voice of Dr. Regis Blackard.
And the best name in the whole freaking Bible. I'm looking at you, Jesus.
Ooh, that's a hot take.
And yeah, he's a great villain. And we also have Corey Burton playing the Angel, who Drew, you may know as the voice of Count Dooku in all things Star Wars animated. Also Cad Bane. Also in the show, he's the voice of Crying Brian Dern. Yeah, man's all over the place. He's a great voice.
Well, now you know.
Indeed. All right.
Let's roll the promo.
Yeah, with all that being said, it's promo time.
Smarter people and better technology would make this planet a better place, wouldn't they? On the next Adventures in Odyssey, Nathaniel thinks he has the answer to the world's problems. But when he and Eugene travel to a distant land, he finds that his idea has already been tried and failed. Why can't everyone just get along? Learn the answer on the next Adventures in Odyssey.
Tower of Babel was constructed during the Italian Renaissance.
That's not what I got from the episode. I'll throw that out there.
Why can't everyone just get along, Drew?
Well, that too, but I was even saying his point wasn't better technology and
No.
was it better technology
And smarter people.
oh, and
Yeah,
smarter
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Yeah, that had nothing to do with
Any of it.
that had nothing to do with even what he was saying, let
Yeah.
alone like Nathaniel in the
In the
story.
intro. Yeah.
The getting along part, I guess that's fair. But-
So the episode itself starts with a debate between Nathaniel, a child, and Eugene, an adult, about like a world without borders and with one language and how like much better that would be. And Eugene considers this a childish idea, and rather than like continue the intellectual debate, as Nathaniel phrases it, he just decides they're going to take an imagination station trip. And I do enjoy the bit of Nathaniel being very like he's got like an air of like faux sophistication.
Oh, yeah,
where
no,
he's just
no.
like, oh, come on, we don't need to resort to such childish methods as
Yeah.
like putting me in this
Object
imagination
lessons.
station to manipulate me into believing what you believe. And I'm like, well, that is kind of the premise of the imagination station. It's where we throw our children who disagree with us. But I'm glad you're aware of that, Nathaniel.
No, yeah, I thought it was interesting because he does have a very much like a faux philosophical, intentionally, I would say, air about him where it almost sounds like this is an anti-communist episode, which is fair. I mean, would be very like Focus, and not the biggest fan of communism myself, so I'm not gonna talk down on it, but it was definitely not the approach I thought was going to pivot into the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, I wrote down Nathaniel sounds like a kid who listened to Imagine by John Lennon one time and then thought to himself, you know what? That doesn't sound so bad. Which I feel like basically kind of sums up, I mean, if you've ever heard Imagine by John Lennon,
Yep.
you
Sums it up pretty
understand
well.
the premise that Nathaniel's saying. Like, he literally, I looked up the lyrics and it's almost
no
line for line for
borders.
a couple things there. I will say, Eugene at the beginning, kind of a butt. Just like, he's saying something, what did he say?
There's the line where it's like where he's
yes.
like, we're both adults.
Yeah,
and he's like,
he said, can we continue this conversation as two adults? And Eugene says, we could, but we're missing an adult. And I was like, why? This is a kid. He's actually having a conversation with you. He's not doing like
it's so
bad.
much sass.
I heard that in my car, and I almost swerved into the other lane. I was like, whoa.
And I understand, right, it's the premise of the episode, but there is something weird about being like, we're having like an interesting conversation here, but rather than continuing in our interesting conversation, I'm just going to like pivot towards like let's go experience a story.
Yeah.
And it's like it's such a like I don't know, It feels very much like a lot of my like church upbringing or whatnot, where it was like, "Hey, I've got questions," and they were like, "Well, just read the Bible."
Yeah. And you know who had also had questions? David.
Yes. I felt that a little bit too. Like, just, this isn't how you should treat anyone, let alone a kid who's asking questions and actually trying to have dialogue with you. Yeah. Though I will say, pretty much directly after that, when Nathaniel's like, you're just going to put me in here so that way I agree with you, I did appreciate how Eugene answered him and said, like, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just
presenting facts.
I'm showing you more facts so that you can make your own conclusion. Yep. There was no point in the imagination station until the very end where Nathaniel specifically asks him what the point was. Did he actually like try and like tell him anything? He just was allowing him to experience it, was telling him like, oh, this is happening, or that's what this is, or whatever. Just like straight
exposition,
facts.
but
yes. Not like trying to sway him in any way. So I did appreciate how he kind of like pulled it together a little bit.
Did.
Yeah.
Like,
after he threw the child into the machine.
yes, I mean, sure, there was that.
But there's the good moment where Nathaniel's like, "Wait, you're going on this with me?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I haven't experienced this either." And Nathaniel kind of has the moment of like, "Oh, maybe I'm going to come out on top."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's at least opportunity. I'm not being told, "Hey, here's what to believe." I am being presented a story.
Yeah.
The goal is still, "Hey, here's what to believe."
Sure.
But it's at least, it lets Nathaniel be an active participant in that, which I do appreciate.
And I will say there was no point in the imagination station where it felt like Eugene had like a big advantage over Nathaniel.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew some things that Nathaniel didn't, but for the most part, either Nathaniel knew already or came to his own conclusion of it with just some basic information from Eugene or surrounding characters, or they were both confused and had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that it wasn't like he went back with him, yes, because he hadn't
And he
experienced
just had his
it.
arms crossed.
Yeah, but he
like,
wasn't just
"Learn
like,
your lesson."
yeah, here's the thing, you punk kid. It felt more like, hey, we're kind of in this together in a sense of like we're going through this and trying to figure out what's going on and learning these things.
Well, one strange thing about this episode that I found was how quickly. So there's not a from a production standpoint, there's not a long intro. There's not a long outro.
There is no outro.
There is no outro. Yeah. It's all like it almost feels like the writer for this like wrote like a 30-minute episode and they were like, actually we have to do ads. And so they had to like chop it up a bunch because it is very much like we have a really rushed conversation, we get thrown into the imagination station, then we have our adventure, and that is the episode. Whereas like, with other Imagination Station episodes, there's a bit more setup, and then there's a bit more debriefing afterwards as far as what was this experience like, and what did you learn, and all of that, where this is just kind of like I was wrong.
Right, but
thanks for listening to Adventures in Odyssey.
Yeah. The advantage they have, though, is that they're sending the adult figure back with them, which normally the kids go on the adventure and then have to come out to be lectured by the adult about what they learned. Whereas because Eugene's there, we can have that realization and conversation happen while they're still in the setting.
Yeah. And it kind of happens throughout. Now, I will say, before they go in, the last thing I wanted to briefly touch on is the quote from Eugene, which is, I think, the crux of the whole sort of imagination, the whole episode, really, where in talking to Nathaniel, he says, "Your notion is that a united mankind can overcome anything is missing one very important element," which is what we learn going into this. And we'll figure out what that element is. But I do think that actually frames helpfully what they're trying to accomplish in the story and what he's trying to communicate to Nathaniel. Yeah, he's like, there is one thing that I think might impact how you feel or think about this. So I'm going to try and show it to you.
Yeah.
And this is maybe the best way I know how to communicate it.
Well, and as an adult talking to a kid and the kid is trying to wax poetic and be intellectual, like, I feel like that is actually pretty honoring to him to let him, instead of, like, be like, no, you're a kid, you don't know anything, like, he kind of lets him, like you said, come to those conclusions on his own and really just kind of go along with him. And yeah, again, like, also the reason that Eugene's in the program is to check for glitches.
Sure.
Yeah,
First time ever.
Which I was really expecting that to be something.
And then it was
Nah,
not
it was
something.
Yeah. No.
He was just giving himself permission
They just all
to,
start-
while he's at work, have a fun adventure.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm on the clock right now. I got to justify this in some way. I'm looking for glitches.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did also like, kind of like, or I appreciated, Andrew, like what you said, how this felt like a very honoring way to talk to Nathaniel about it. This, like, he is using a story. And while, we made jokes about, like, all right, he just kind of threw him in the imagination.
Yeah.
Like, using stories, especially to communicate with kids, even if they wax poetic like Nathaniel did. I mean, I have no idea how smart Nathaniel actually is in the stories, but even for smart kids, using an illustration or a story is a very effective way of communicating an idea. And it, like we were talking about, he's not forcing it on him. He's simply just showing him the story and saying, well, how does this change what you think?
Right. And in the real world, you would weave things from that story into a conversation.
Sure.
Yeah.
But this is a show predicated on everything's got to be an adventure.
Yes.
And also, like, they have the device of, we can put you back here in the moment and have you experience it first.
Which would be better. I would rather, as a kid,
Right.
I
Yeah.
would rather do that than talking to an adult. Are you kidding me?
For sure.
But it's like the thing we were alluding to earlier, which is the bad approach, is like, here's the passage that'll answer all your questions.
Yes,
go
go
and read
it.
that.
Yes.
Go figure
But
it out.
but right, the better approach being like, let's sit here and have a conversation, and we can
About this
discuss.
thing, yes.
We can discuss with this passage in mind.
Yes.
But obviously they have a third option that we in the real world don't actually have.
Yes, which is go back in time and experience it firsthand, which is pretty slick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we could get there.
Yeah, no, I mean,
With
who knows?
HoloLens and all
Sure,
the augmented
sure.
reality and such.
Sure. I mean, the Imagination Station's just good VR.
Yeah, right?
I mean, really, that's fair.
I think that Focus could probably sue. I don't know who,
But they could.
but they could.
They absolutely.
I
yes.
think the concept of VR predates Adventures in Odyssey.
Certainly not. Certainly not.
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Doesn't really have VR.
Don't they?
2001 and Adventure in Odyssey.
Amen.
I mean, how has that not happened?
That actually does sound
Right. That's what I was gonna say. Is never mind. We have My Girl Hallie. We have what was it? We recently covered an episode where someone did. Oh, it's the Seven Deadly Dwarves.
Yes,
has someone doing an imitation of HAL 9000. So
Yeah.
it's fine. That's not the point of what we're talking about, but it did just happen. So yeah, I don't think, Andrew, I don't think you and I was trying to think as I was prepping this, I don't think we've done a pure Imagination Station episode before.
What do you mean?
Like an episode that is just like someone goes on an adventure in the Imagination Station. We did the environment enhancer with Connie, which
and
is
Maury.
basically the same thing.
Yeah.
We did, but like, yeah, I don't know.
And we did the AR stuff with Maury.
Sure. And we did stuff that like Lucy gets blown up by the Imagination Station.
Yeah, exactly.
The Novacom stuff is all using Imagination Station tech.
Yeah.
But like but I don't know.
And then
that
there's
we've-
like Wit
and
goes back to visit, like goes into the Imagination Station to like look for answers for something.
No, that's I think Jack or Jason.
Oh, Jack or Jason.
Do like
Is
some
that
research.
Oh, no,
We
Eugene returns.
Eugene returns. They restore his memory with the Imagination Station.
But not like a classic
Right, but
You
I
know.
like for a like
Coke slushy
right.
of imagination.
in the way that
Station
like we
adventures.
don't usually talk about Bible stories. I don't think we've done like
I could go for a Coke slushy. Do you want to pause again and just get some?
no.
Okay.
Didn't you had a Coke slushy last time we recorded? Didn't you?
I did.
Because Balin brought you on
Yeah.
during the AJ episode.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, that was great. That was why it was our longest episode.
Had enough caffeine to keep
Yeah.
going.
But yeah, all that to say, this is our first one that's like we're doing like a full imagination station. As far as I know, we've covered almost 200 episodes, so
Which
it is
is
hard to
insane.
keep track.
Yeah.
Anyway, they go in, they land together in Babylon. There is a ziggurat in front of them that is ascending into the clouds, and they get immediately mistaken as slaves.
So, okay. Question for academic scholar here. At what... So, I read for one of my assignments that Genesis 1 is commonly dated to, like, 6th century BC during Babylonian captivity. Have you...
In like when it was written.
Yeah. Like, when it was, like, recorded.
Yeah.
Do you know when this was written? Was that like officially penned down? Would that have been during that same period?
I mean, like, Christian tradition has, like, Genesis being penned by Moses for the most part.
Yeah, that's general Christian tradition. There are it depends on how old you think the world is. Maybe 6,000 BC is actually too old, and the
Yeah.
world didn't exist.
Well, what's your personal? Well, I'm not asking for what God
Drew,
says. I'm
you have
asking
to,
for what
you have
Drew
to,
says.
you gotta defend your position here and hope no theology professors listen to you.
That sounds subpar.
They don't. I guarantee you. If they did, they would have given up a long time ago on this show.
I honestly don't know. I haven't done enough research into the specific authorship of, the Pentateuch and early Old Testament writings. The tradition is that Moses wrote through near the end of Deuteronomy, at which point Joshua took over, or scribes for Joshua. So if you had to pin me to a wall and put a gun to my head, what do I believe? That's probably what I would say at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't done enough research to give you a more complete answer.
Well, I just know because we're talking Babylonian servitude and stuff, and then obviously Israel was taken captive by the Babylonians. So
Yeah. Sure. So this story far predates Babylonian.
the empire.
Yes. Like this is know when the flood happened, like 3 to 4 generations, depending on who
Well,
we're
yeah, they
talking
even
about.
talk about that in the episode. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I
So
believe this establishes 4 generations, but one of those the person who's 4 generations after it is 400 years old.
yes,
So
correct. Even though Nimrod is only 3 generations out and is apparently a young spry king.
Right.
Now, when people live to be 400, I mean,
Yeah.
we have people today where like, you're older than your nephew or whatever, or
Sure.
younger than your nephew, whatever.
Sure,
But
yeah, it is. Well, and that kind of gets us to the crux of this episode, which is like, so I intentionally didn't go back and reread the story because I was like, I want to be able to come at it from like my memory, what the show is presenting, and let Drew be the expert. But like, my recollection is that this is like a blip in Genesis.
yeah, it's
Like,
9 verses. it's 9 verses. It's not that big. And a lot of the stuff that they had, this actually, I wrote a little blip at the top of my thing. There's 9 verses, and then there's a lot of like, I don't know, points of mystery in terms of like what actually happened. And there's things that like we're pretty confident, and things that we're not near as confident about. And I will say off the top, in terms of the way that they structured the story, the things that they did are things that are a potential scholarly appropriate evaluation of the Tower of Babel, for the most part. I mean, obviously there are some artistic liberty in the sense of like, you know, Eber's granddaughter, like what that kind of weirdness. But in terms of like Nimrod ruling, all of that kind of stuff, the ziggurat for Marduk, all of that is an acceptable interpretation of what is going on there. So I will give them credit for that. They at least, it's not like some of the other ones where they just kind of like threw in whatever. Like it feels like they actually did their research, because in doing research of my own, I found that was certainly one of the more popular options. So, yeah.
So yeah, because it's one of those things where it's like, right, I feel like my view on this story is very informed by Sunday school and by nothing academic, because it is just like, I'm just like, in my head, I'm picturing like the Washington Monument, but taller.
Yep.
Not like a building like the ziggurat.
Yeah.
Like it's like that very, I don't know. I feel like I have I've always had such a childish approach because it has the feeling of like, of a lot of like mythology in it, where it's just kind of like, hey, we all speak different languages. How did that happen? Yeah. Boom, here's a story. And like, whether or not that's your interpretation of why this story exists, it's easy to fall into the path of just viewing it through that lens. Yeah. Even if I'm not like, even if that's not my belief, it can still exist kind of in that place in my head.
Sure.
Where I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, that's like the story where it's like, hey, we've got language now. Sure, and then I move on.
Yes.
So, and helped by the fact that it is such a brief portion of the Old Testament.
Yeah. No, definitely. I agree.
But so I was assuming, or like, and there's also, I guess there's the mix in of like stuff that I did actually learn in like, from like mythology of like, I feel like, I don't know what, so we've got, it makes linguistic sense that Babel is tied to Babylon. Is that there in the text?
Yeah. I mean, Babylon is the name of Babel later. Okay. I mean, that's, yeah.
Right.
And Babel, actually, weirdly, is a sort of Hebrew kind of mixing it up a little bit from balal, which is the Hebrew verb for like to be confused. And so
sure.
It's kind of like a fun play on words where like you confuse the word about being confused.
Yep.
And now it's Bavel.
Right.
Technically.
In the same way that like all Old Testament names have like
actually
a double meaning.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like confused place spelled wrong. Which is just it's so choice.
That's good. That's good.
I say this, I think, every time I'm on, but anyone who says God doesn't have a sense of humor is just so wrong.
No.
He's so funny. Yeah. He's like the OG dad joke maker, and I love it. Yeah, so that yes, the tie to Babylon is appropriate. And it's in the same location. It's in what would be modern-day Iraq, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. It's the Shinar Valley.
Yeah.
And is it presumed that it is like historically viable that this structure was as large as, say, the text would claim? Where it's
so
basically touching the sky. It's like the first skyscraper.
Yes, that's an interesting point. So I mean, I'm not sure about skyscraper in the way that we would talk about it, but as far as that time period, at least, it is likely that it was a massive building. And part of the reasons for this is because of that area's ability, like their materials for creating things in like the Israel area, and further in that direction. They didn't have like bricks, like they didn't bake bricks or dry bricks or anything. They just used stone. And then like mud and clay was used to create like smaller house buildings. Stone was used for larger buildings, temples, things like that.
Probably more of like an adhesive type situation compared to literally, making your own bricks.
Correct. Whereas over in this valley, they had no stone. It just wasn't a really plentiful resource. So they learned over time how to take, the sand and the mud and the dirt and stuff and make bricks, and then also create
Did
a
they
sort
put
of
straw in it? Isn't that?
I don't know.
I think straw is in some stuff, but yeah,
I don't
maybe.
know.
It's possible that it's in here. I didn't
I feel
see
like I
that in
heard Carver mention something about straw in OT1.
entirely possible.
Sure.
But it is certainly the brick and mortar is a feature of this location, which is also kind of how they located or how they worked to locate the Shinar Valley, because at the time period that one might try and date this, looking at it from a biblical standpoint, this would be the only location where they would have bricks and mortar. And it would make sense that they specify in verse 3, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had bricks for stone and they had tar for mortar, clarifying the difference of building materials when they're doing this, as opposed to where the author was from. Seeing this or having this passed down, clarifying hey, instead
and they
of,
went through the drive-thru at McDonald's and they ordered a large fry.
Yes,
and we did
if
not
we
know.
only went inside of a McDonald's to get food, and then they were they went to the
They
McDonald's.
yelled through a window?
And they went through the drive-thru in order to purchase the food. They're clarifying what it is because it's different than the standard. So, yes.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and ziggurats are, at least from my understanding, they have a really big base.
Yes.
Despite being not super tall. So if you wanted to make it really tall, it wouldn't be that hard to almost pyramid it up.
Yes.
Much farther.
It's similarly to a pyramid where you start on the outside and you just kind of work it up. You do the same thing with the ziggurat where essentially it's a spiral that just kind of keeps on keeping on.
Spiraling.
Yeah.
And so you can just add another layer all the way up to the top.
And my
it's
childish
stuck.
imagination when I heard the Tower of Babel imagined the Washington Monument. Just
Yep.
way
just
taller.
straight up. Just essentially a stick to the sky. Yep. No, I agree. That's exactly what I
I'm
thought
picturing.
of
I'm
the
picturing the classic square 2x2 Duplo block just stacked on top
all
of
the
each
way
other.
up.
all the way. Yep. Nope. That's exactly fair.
It's very likely to fall over, but when it does, those pieces will not break apart.
Yeah. So this ziggurat is explained as being a temple to Marduk. Marduk. What's our?
Depends
who
on
cares?
how you
Okay.
want to do it. Marduk is fine.
How would you say it in Hebrew?
That is. Hold on, I had it written here. Merudach.
Oh, that's hot.
So we probably won't call it that for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, I'm
but
not. I'm probably going to say Marduk and Marduk.
Merudach
Just depending
is
on
the
how it rolls off my tongue.
appropriate Hebrew pronunciation. I normally
Marmaduke bad?
Marduk. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I'll probably call him Marduk through the rest of it, because that's the general English transliteration.
There we go. So this is a temple being built to Marduk,
Which is not in the Bible.
Okay, that's what that was going to be my next thing. Is I assume that's not in there. I do know Marduk is being Babylonian god dude. So but that's from mythology, not from
Yeah. So I mean,
Scripture.
Marduk is mentioned in Scripture as
Plenty of
Babylonian
times,
god,
yeah.
but not here. So I mean,
Because it's 9 verses.
yeah. So this is where you kind of have two divergent paths in terms of the purpose of the tower. The first is it's a temple to Marduk, which traditionally most of the ziggurats in history have been temples to gods or things or whatever. So that's not necessarily a bad choice. And Marduk would be. This would likely be one of the first ziggurats, and Marduk is the head honcho of that
Cosmology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the idea that it would be a temple to Marduk, trying to be the greatest temple or whatever, that adds up. That's fair.
Reasonable. Yeah.
The alternative is it is an attempt by humanity to defy God, asking them to spread out, and in an attempt to kind of stay together and kind of stick it to the man, so to speak, they made this building because, I mean, have you ever worked on like a project with other people, you know, like you kind of get that buy-in and you're all kind of in it together, and then it feels good to keep doing it, and so you keep working together, especially when it's a good team and you're all on the same page. So
Yeah, no, that's the premise of this podcast.
Yep.
great. So similarly to why this podcast still exists, the other primary interpretation, right, is that all the people together wanted to build this as a sort of monument to themselves, and also as a way of like having a sort of collective consciousness idea, which in
like,
the
like we can join the gods in the sky and the high council or whatever, and
yes, they attempting to be their own god. And
and that's always been my assumption about this story, is that like this is a celebration of humanity, and it honestly and that I feel like lines up really well with the premise that's set out before they go into the imagination station.
but it is not backed
But
up.
then it's not the story they decide to tell.
But Dylan, you forgot something really important, and that's that bad gods are more evil and icky, and it's easier for us to know that that's bad rather than seeing humans do something that they think is good.
that is actually
right. Yeah. because it brings up the interesting thing of like they're immediately pointed out as being slaves.
Yep.
And are told
Which
to
is
like
not in there.
get in line and get to work, and then like and then there's this whole thing about like anytime they just casually bring up their god being the one true god, and this guy is like, no, we're all Marduk people around here, like get in line.
Yeah.
You
For the
people, like,
funnies.
you're not even allowed to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I was like, once again, having not like revisited the story for a long time, but very much that was not my impression of things.
Yeah.
And it seemed like I mean, maybe it is just kind of, this is a story for kids kind of thing, but like to very quickly be like, it sets up such an us versus them, where them is clearly bad as they worship a false god, and they're enslaving everyone else and telling them that like they can't even talk about the truth. Versus like us, the pure righteous people who like believe there's still like the God of our ancestors, and it just struck me as weird, because I don't think it furthers the illustration of their point. So it seems like a weird leap to take the story in this direction without doing that. But I guess if you're saying this is a popular interpretation, or like a generally accepted one, then that makes it less of a leap.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. In defense of Focus on the Family in this situation, what they did in terms of Murdoch and Nimrod and that kind of structure is acceptable. And I mean, if you think about it, right, let's say that they are building a temple to Murdoch, and Nimrod, who is the great-grandson of Noah, grandson of Japheth, I think. Either way, son of Cush. Got that one for sure. All right.
Well, and to be clear, Eber is 420 years old.
Yeah!
Good.
You best believe my ears perked up.
So assuming
that's an option.
those things, that interpretation is accurate, right? It would make sense that you wouldn't be allowed to speak of Adonai like that. You wouldn't do that. Also, he shouldn't be calling him Yahweh, because you don't call God by his name. That's actually super inappropriate.
But
Isn't it?
But
None of the characters. It's only
none
Eugene
of them know
who
that.
says
Yes, it is. I will note it is only Eugene, but also even today it's kind of like maybe you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But
That's good to know. So if I'm writing my paper, I shouldn't refer to God as Yahweh? Is it Because I've seen
among Protestants, people don't care as much.
Yeah,
if you are
that's-
talking
yeah.
to anyone who is a Catholic or is Jewish,
big
don't.
doo-doo. Big doo-doo.
Super don't. Yeah, one true God isn't appropriate. Okay. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think it is that interesting thing too, where it's like they can't do. Where I was like, man, why did they keep like falling on one true God? And then I was like, oh right, we're like early enough in history that there's not really another option. Like you can't be like, and they do the God of Noah at one point, which kind of works, but like they don't have like the classic God of like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Like you don't have.
Well, and they don't
like,
even have the I am statement yet. Like,
Right.
We don't have I am who
great
I am.
point.
So like.
Yeah.
Which is where the name of God comes from, right? It's a variation of the verb, to do or to be. And so that's where it's written here in the Hebrew text, right? It's written as, the tetragrammaton. But
Sorry, what?
Tetragrammaton? It's the 4 consonants that make up the name of God.
So it'd be YWHW?
Yod, He, Vav, He. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're reading like a Jewish scripture or something like that,
If you were reading it out loud,
and-
you would replace it with Adonai.
Okay.
So instead of saying
Yeah.
whatever the tetragrammaton would be pronounced as, which they don't pronounce it, you would say Adonai,
which is
the Lord.
The Lord. Cool. Like that.
which is
I'm
used
cool with
other
that.
places. Like Adonai is another word that they used to describe it, like Adonai Elohim, the Lord God.
I think we should bring that back.
I like.
I
Adonai.
love
It's
Elohim.
a fun one,
That's
and
a great-
Elohim is also good. Anyway,
You ever been in worship and they bust out the Elohim word? Doesn't that make you feel closer to God? I don't know. Maybe that's just a me thing.
I don't know if I've been in worship and they busted out the Elohim word, but,
The E word?
the E word.
I'm presuming it is. Is it spelled with an E?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. So the Murdoch. Oh, so it would make sense that they wouldn't be able to talk about Adonai in that situation. So I see kind of how they got to that point. However, Dylan, I do agree with you that I think that ultimately this takes away from the fact that humans are just
Well, and the point that they're trying to
Bad.
address before they get in the imagination station, that is, well, if humans unite, then we can solve all of our problems. And Eugene's like, well, you're missing something, and that would be God, but it's shown in the episode that, like, what, it's just there's other gods, and that's the problem.
Right, like it becomes a like the good people versus a dictator.
Yeah.
Versus like humans
Humanism.
versus themselves.
Yeah.
kind
well,
of
and
thing.
that's the other thing. It shows. Well, we'll get to that. I have to cool it, but I think that if you think about like the really bad things that are happening here, like what makes this society bad, right? They worship Murdoch. They are building big temple to him to reach the stars to know him better and get his wisdom from the sky, and also
Amen.
the fact that they're doing human sacrifices and slavery.
Yep.
Right. So those are the bad things.
Which are, to be clear, bad things.
They are bad.
The
But
the
all
hosts of the Wad Fam Chalk Pod do stand behind those as being bad.
yes, great, good.
What?
I'm glad.
I
But
thought you
I think-
endorsed slavery.
Yikes. But I think looking at that, you miss the point of what's actually the problem, because it becomes more a bunch of symptoms as opposed to
What is the underlying cause?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so as a kid who would listen to this, you'd be like, oh, well, of course they're bad. They're
They're worshiping the wrong god.
Well, and that's what Nathaniel says too. Like, there's slaves here, and Eugene even makes a point of saying, like, yeah, not so great after all, huh? It's like, all right, well, yes, but
That's not the point.
them having slaves also kind of
It muddies the waters.
Yeah.
yes, because additionally, if they're not all bought in, right, to this thing, then they're not working together, right? Like, and if there are people who are willing to rise up, then they're not working together.
They're not truly
splitting up
unified.
the language is not. That's not the problem. Like, God isn't needed. They'll rise up and do their own thing anyway, which will bring an end to this whole situation. Like, that's not.
Right. Like we're given we're given this picture beforehand of this is a time in which like humanity is unified under one cause, and then we land in the time and immediately there is disunity.
Yeah.
and that inherently makes this less impactful.
Exactly.
Because the whole point of it is no longer the point of it.
Yeah. Well, and again, but within the context that all of us kind of grew up being exposed to it and understanding it within the greater biblical narrative as to like, how it serves. Like, the Tower of Babel is, from my perspective, has always been like, humans can't be God. We tried that. We built the real tall tower, and now we've got a bunch of different languages. So clearly that didn't work.
Yes. And I think that's a good point to take out of it. And additionally, like, while this can be seen as the birth of any language, it does point out that, the groups did disperse, like, right after they had kids, right? Like, so... Yep. In chapter 10, it's a whole thing talking about the descendants of Noah. And even in like the first generation, people are moving to Africa and to, parts of Europe and Asia and whatever. So like they're
wherever
already...
the Nephilim are.
They're exactly. So they're already spreading. So it is entirely possible at the point that this actually happened, those other cultures, right, have even had their own language. Like that's not actually outside the question. It's possible they didn't. They just kept speaking the same one. But it's also possible that they had already kind of moved past that. But the problem is that this group of people actively defied God and his request for them to go and populate and all of that, and rather said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Which is directly after, in the last chapter, where it said, go and spread over the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And so it's like this, it's a direct defiance as a group, where they've all kind of come together with one purpose.
Yeah.
In verse 1, it talks about the whole earth had one language, and a lot of English translations say, and the same words, or and the same voice, or whatever. The word there is davar, davarim, technically it's plural. But that means word or thing. So, like, I think it actually makes a little bit more sense to kind of pull out the force of thing as more of like an idea of like the earth had one language and the same word or same concept, idea, same thing that they were valuing.
Same focus.
Yes, same focus. That's a great way to put it. And so that focus then is to not be scattered, which is direct defiance of God, and then to build a tower to reach up to the heavens in order to, one, remain
Directly
unified,
defy
and
God.
two, to directly defy God. So, like, it's, by making it a bunch of slaves or all this bad stuff, then I feel like you're kind of pulling away from even what they're trying to communicate in this audio episode.
One, how it's been understood within the faith.
Yes.
So in the plot of the episode, it's Nathaniel eventually figures out, like, has this moment of realization where he's like, oh, wait, this is the Tower of Babel, which I think is a really fun thing of just, like, he has also, like, grown up with this story.
Yeah.
And, like, has come to this on his own of, like, connecting the dots and being like, aha, I understand what's happening here now. And then they all go to... I forget who the guy they go with is, but they go to the house of Eber.
Yoktali.
Ah, okay.
He's not real.
Okay.
Oh,
but
man.
Eber is?
Eber is.
So I was like, when they do like the trace back of Eber's line of like saying like, oh, he's connected to Noah, I was like, this has to be someone who was like mentioned in a chronology at some point. And so that's where we're getting the character from. Is that a good guess?
Correct. Yep. So Eber is the son of Shelah, who's the son of, oh gosh, I should have done this. Arphaxad, who's the son of Shem, which is one of the three sons of Noah. So that's how it connects back.
Yeah. And he has, so he has Jacques. I'm just going with Jacques.
It's Yoktali.
Yoktali and Lillian.
I mean, they say with a hard J, but it is certainly not Hebrew doesn't have a J, so
No.
let's.
All right.
Thanks, Phil.
So we've got. Well, it's not Phil who wrote this, but although he did do the direction, which I guess would be pronunciation. Interesting.
I don't know.
Look at that.
Always blame Phil.
And then we have Lillian.
And she's a woman. She wasn't noted because she didn't do anything particularly special. It's the Old Testament.
She's a granddaughter. She also doesn't do anything special in this episode.
That's a great point. Honestly, she's just kind of there.
She's there. I guess I'll give them props for including one woman in the story.
I mean, there's not really anyone specifically in this story.
So it's like if you're gonna.
So I mean, fair. They had a slave man who connected them with Eber, who's an actual person, and then they added a girl, and that's great.
Yeah, and then their home gets invaded. So they come to this thing where they're like, we all believe in like the one true God. This city's amazing, but like we can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And then guards show up and a couple people escape out. Nathaniel and Jacques escape out the back, and Lillian and Eugene get taken by a guard who says resistance is futile, which was very funny.
I hate I hate how these Nathaniel and Eugene are just dumb. I have a comment that said Eugene making the dumb door comment made me dumber.
Oh, what? No, you. Oh, see, I love that joke.
I also
where the guard's like, "Where does that door go?" And he goes,
"Depends on which side you go through." Well, and Nathaniel,
I
not
heard
taking
that
it,
and I went, I'm gonna have to use that in my life if the opportunity presents itself.
I'm
It's
never
gonna be
asking
me.
you where
I'm
the
gonna
door
ask
goes.
you where the door goes, and you're gonna say whatever.
And I
Put my head through the door.
I hate that Nathaniel can't take a hint, like when they're talking about the one true God, and he's like, "Bro, shut up about it, dude." And he's like, "Why can't I talk about the one true God, bro?"
Yeah.
The first time, shut up. You're a slave. You almost got whipped. Why are you still talking?
Where he's like, "Wow, you might actually hit me with that whip."
Yeah.
He's like, "Careful, you're gonna hit someone." And the guy's like, "Dude,
Oh, I
come
must
on."
be losing my
I
touch.
missed.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh, and it's so upsetting.
For immediately recognizing slaves, he did not grasp anything
The
else.
concept of
dynamic.
slavery. Yeah, no. And slightly later, when Eugene and Lillian are in the Nimrod's court or whatever, unprompted, this dude goes off about the one true God. Eugene, he didn't ask you about that. You didn't have to go in the shtick. It's not like you were defending anything. You just were like, "Hey, by the way, what do you want to learn from the stars? Because, I mean, they just have to believe in God, too."
Right,
It's like,
but-
why would you do that?
Well, but see, this is the thing that, especially with the way this dynamic is set up in this episode, and also, the lens of focus on the family, is they have to turn it into a persecution narrative. And, it really... I feel like it really parallels a lot of their more contemporary stuff where they're not talking about a story in the past, but are talking about,
culture war
life.
type stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It has such a, I have to stand here and defend my position and assert that, what I believe is different than what you believe, unprompted and with no concern about my own well-being and no concern about your receptiveness to hear this. I just gotta speak my truth, man.
Yeah.
And it
And who cares if the child gets killed?
and yeah, it just feels like, wow, that is, this is late 90s. That's so much of their energy, especially during that time and moving forward. But it's this thing of oh, well, we got right, here's a story about about humanity kind of besting itself, but we're going to turn it into an our God versus their God, and we're going to make sure that our main characters are going out and evangelizing and are being are literally going to be burned at an altar as the result. And it's that is, it's not as you said, Drew, it's not antithetical to the time. It's not necessarily bad theology, because this is like a plausible turn of events, but it feels like it is so informed by like their lens and them projecting back in a way that I don't particularly like.
Well, and in a way that I don't feel particularly serves the episode and what they're trying to accomplish. Yeah. Where it's like, Eugene, if you want Nathaniel to come to these conclusions on his own, is that really best executed by you standing up and espousing what he should believe in front of everybody?
Well, he wasn't there.
True.
Yeah, and the thing is not that Nathaniel doesn't believe in God. Like that's never called into question in this episode. It's very much like Nathaniel's like, humans working together can accomplish great things, and Eugene's like, well, yeah, but not in reality.
Yeah.
But
fair.
But that's not. But then we go back to a time, and the tension becomes persecution.
Yeah. Instead of
and a religious coup and uprising.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, they do say it's bad. The like Eber, the wise man, and the angel are both like, don't do that. So to be fair, it's not like they're like, this is a good thing.
Yeah.
But also,
But they don't even say it's not a good thing. They just say it's like not necessary.
Yeah. Well, he says don't do it, so there's no unnecessary bloodshed. But then stuff happens, right? Language is mixed up. They run away. And they see smoke rising from the city and say that's the smoke of war. You think that a war's happening without bloodshed? Like, that's not the point. The point was not to spare blood. The blood was blood, man. It did its thing. Like, there was war.
Blood.
Blood's gonna blood.
Blood's gonna blood.
New merch.
Blood is gonna blood. That's rough. But, like...
If I wear that in the city, I will get shot.
Probably. Don't do that. Yeah, I don't know. It just... The whole... these extra things... Now, the religious uprising is not... I don't know where they got that from. But all of these other things feel so extraneous to what it feels like they're actually trying to communicate, and what the story ultimately communicates in Scripture. And it's just there, and I feel like you could still fill a full 30 minutes with just
25, don't forget.
Sorry. I feel like you could fill a full... well, this one was 26 minutes and 11 seconds, to be fair. But true. I feel like you could fill the full time with just what's in those verses and extrapolating, like, them working together to build this great monument to themselves.
Exactly.
Because they're building themselves a city and a tower whose top reaches the heavens.
Well, and how much more powerful would it have been for Nathaniel to enthusiastically participate in the construction of the tower than to go to the top and be like, oh, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and then you get the story unfolding, as opposed to what we proposed as, or what they proposed as, you know, just kind of like a persecution narrative where there's a holy remnant that's calling it out, and they're perfectly on that side.
Yeah, because it shows from the point that he's called a slave, right? From that point on, he appreciates the size of the tower, but he does not appreciate what it's attempting to accomplish. Right. As opposed to if he were like, wow, look at this awesome thing that we're doing, let's do this awesome thing, and then sees how that is in direct violation of God, and how it's a man-based ego thing, essentially. Like that, I feel like that really clarifies the purpose of this, as opposed to just... whatever. I don't know.
As opposed to what we got, which is appearing to be more ideologically based than in the scriptures themselves, and what you know scholarly critiques would suggest.
We have a messenger show up at Eber, his house. That is, I mean, it's credited in the episode as an angel. It's very clearly an angel, but I like the very Old Testament feel of being like, we've got a messenger. Like,
well, I mean, and in both Greek and Hebrew, the word for angel is also the word for messenger. Like, even just non-religious. Like, that's a messenger who's come to bring some news. It's like,
Grapes on sale now.
yeah, like it could be as simple as that. Like that is the same thing as an angel, like in terms of word. So,
Yeah. And then we get the scene on the tower where Eugene's defending his theses, and my main note there is just like, and we touched on it earlier, but Earl Bowen as Nimrod is doing great work.
So good.
He's perfect villain.
Can you say Nimrod in the proper like Hebrew dialect? Is that possible? I really just want to hear it.
let me pull up where
Your
he is.
Nimrod pronunciation. What's authentic here?
Well, this is a shout out to the Bible boys. Me and Sir Druithan had a Bible study in high school where our dads and us would get together and read the Bible, and that was like the one running bit established by said meeting was
that Nimrod was cool.
that we all could agree on.
Well, because okay, so here's the other thing. Nimrod is called a mighty hunter before the Lord. So, it's used other places like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And it talks about him going down and starting starting cities in these different areas, which is how they focus on the family, got to him being the emperor and the temple being to Murdoch because it's in that location. There's a whole...
Yeah, they make him the high priest of Babel.
Yes. So there's that. There's an idea that maybe Nimrod is actually Gilgamesh, which is a historic figure from Babylonian stuff. There's a theory that Nimrod is actually what Marduk is based off of. There's a theory that Nimrod is never actually real. It's just an idea of a person.
Sure, it's just like the word for emperor.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. But like things like that. So that's kind of how they got to that point. But the only thing that we actually see about Nimrod is that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord.
Amen.
So I mean, yeah, who knows? Anyway, Nimrod, you're not gonna like it. It's just Nimrod.
Oh, actually, I kind of like it though.
This is nothing too fancy. But all that to say, this whole villain arc for Nimrod is
that blasphemous?
not necessary. I mean, again, it's something that you could make the case that this is directly after the chapter where it talks about him going and settling these different towns this area. So, sure. I mean, he's never mentioned. Eber's never mentioned. No one's ever mentioned in the story by name other than the Lord and humankind. Those are the only two actual characters, as well as like the tower. So in terms of like who's doing it, what they're doing,
we just don't know.
As my Hebrew teacher says, miodecha. No one knows.
No one knows.
So, while it's an acceptable choice, I probably wouldn't do it because you're making an assumption. And also, you don't need to make that assumption for your point.
Exactly.
Sure. But you do need to make that assumption to turn 9 verses into 20 minutes.
I don't think so.
You have to make some assumptions.
Sure, but you don't have to make those ones.
Okay. All right. Fair.
Well, and you could just call him King Batty or something like that, as opposed to
just
throwing
say
other
the
biblical
King of
names
Babel.
on.
Yeah. I think they're having fun with the idea of, we can try and like flesh this out with characters who we know are contemporary.
Yes.
But they're not. It's not like they're killing it on that front.
Sure.
Also, Nimrod's just fun as the name for a villain.
Yes.
Even though it's more fun as the name of a hero.
I personally agree with Andrew, but I get the point.
But yeah, so we have this. Yeah, he then, as we said, like starts or decides like they're gonna sacrifice Eugene and Lillian to Marduk.
Which I will say, human sacrifices, like very few places in ancient Near Eastern history. Murdoch is one of the few gods that specifically did
quite a bit of it.
Yes, a lot of human sacrifice. So, thumbs up, focus on the family.
Way to go!
You didn't just throw human... I mean, you might have just thrown human sacrifice in there and got lucky. But I would like to think better of you and that you did a modicum of research and found that this is something that Murdoch liked and like went for it.
Didn't he do like child sacrifice too for Murdoch?
He did too, yes. But also people.
Yeah.
So the fact that
Yummy.
this is not something that's common, in fact, it's very uncommon, and it's accurate, and that would, like, if this were what happened, right, it were, Murdoch in a temple to him, then that would be, that would make sense.
And yeah, so maybe, right, we've got a lot of historical accuracy, but not a ton of biblical accuracy.
Yes, I think I appreciate the fact that within the fiction that they have created, notice how I said fiction, they are consistent.
Sure.
And I do appreciate that. The fact that, like, all right, so they've decided that this is the way that they want to, interpret
Spin the story.
that.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, a acceptable
We don't know.
way.
Yeah.
So they did that, but then they were consistent with it throughout, and they kind of played out the logical conclusions of what that might look like. So I'm not actually opposed to that. I'm opposed to the fact that they didn't have to, and they could have gotten the point across better.
Yeah. And then they underline this in this moment in an interesting way, where they're talking about, like, when it started, everyone was working on the tower by choice, but now it's by force.
Yeah.
Which is like it feels very much
Communism?
Right. Like a communist commentary.
We had a
Absolute
revolution.
Power corrupts
Yes.
kind of message.
Not entirely incorrect.
Sure.
But
right. Once again, like an apt observation, but not applicable to the story in a way that, like, really, like, connected with me. Like, I was a little, I was just kind of annoyed that it's like, that the message kind of, just becomes like humanity's bad because they're always gonna wind up doing bad things, which is like, it's one of those things where it's like, fundamentally that's hard to argue with.
Yeah.
And yet, like, I think that there's a cooler way that you could have carried that out in this story that reflects the original text in a more accurate and compelling way.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like it's, again, one of those things that they don't need, but is there just kind of because it's there. It muddies the water. It doesn't have to be there. You don't need this arc. And in fact, by having it that way, you've already kind of undercut, like what we were talking about earlier.
You tip your hand immediately.
Yes. And it's this idea of, like, they're not all working together at this point. Like, they're already in disagreement, which Yeah.
Yep. And so this is where we get the revolutionary moment. We kind of see see the revolutionaries assemble to overtake the thing, and then we've got Emer being like,
the
nope,
proletariat have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Right. We don't need to do this. We can do this without bloodshed. God himself will act. And which I feel like we've already covered pretty well. And then we have an incredible, I will say, like, maybe my favorite moment of the episode from a sound design perspective is when the sacrifice is about to happen on the top of the tower, and you have, like, Earl Bowen's voice, like, echoing down. You have, like, the sound of wind and birds and whatnot of, like, establishing, like, we are very, like, high up. Like, it all just, like, it sounds fantastic in that moment.
Well, and even when he's doing that and he screams, into the crowd, like in Murdoch, we are one, and then they, like, this chorus of, like, what sounds like a ton of voices all scream back in unison, like in Murdoch, we are one. It's like, oh,
yeah,
all right. So, like, I mean, they might be saying this under duress because he's a king and he's going to kill some people who didn't believe, but
yeah, but it's chilling.
Yes.
And, like, that is, Dwayne Harms is did the production on this episode, which he's not a guy that we talk about often, because he was I think fairly short-lived on the show, but just, like, bringing his A game on this episode. Like, I think it sounds great throughout. I think the musical cues are pretty decent. Like, it's recycled John Campbell music from previous Imagination Station adventures in the same part of the world, but, like, It's solid. And yeah, I just like the thing we always got to come back to is regardless of whatever else you want to say, boy, it does sound good.
Sound pretty.
I will say, I mean, there wasn't a point at all where I felt like, wow, this music is just really overwhelming or overdone or anything like that. Just it was at worst solid and at best really good.
Yeah.
So,
and then this is where like Nimrod goes to start like the sacrifice, and like mid-sentence his words get jumbled and he's no longer understandable.
Well, you skipped a part there.
Oh, what did I skip?
Well, I mean, the angel coming in.
Okay.
But also before that, I did want to note when Nimrod is talking before that in Murdoch We Are One, he says that Murdoch saved them from the flood, gave them a single tongue, gave them the wisdom to build the city and the temple, which I just thought was interesting. That, like, I mean, we see this in other parts of scripture and stuff, and even we as people now do similar things where, like, it's one of those things that's like how quickly you forget, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
I mean that's like the theme of the Old Testament.
yes. And I mean the theme of my daily life and the fact of like,
sure.
Did I take my medication?
That's a dangerous question that I ask myself regularly. But like that sort of forgetfulness and sort of reattribution of those good things that happened to, you know, Murdoch. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But then also the messenger interrupts and he's like, you know, stop or whatever. I don't know exactly. Or he just says Nimrod, stop or something like that.
Yep.
Nimrod is then like, who dares interrupt?
Sure.
And he responds, I put the quote down because it was pretty baller. He was like, the Lord God who sees your minds and your hearts and the single way you have turned away from him. Oof. I was like, oh. And he's
Couldn't
like,
be me. I've never done that, not once in my life.
And he's like, since you have lost understanding of God, then you too will lose understanding of each other. Which I was like, so that was pretty solid. And the other thing I wanted to give them credit for is the calling of Nimrod a mere man. The scripture when it talks about like the people. So let us go down and. Where does it say that? In verse 5 when he says Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower that humankind was building. The actual Hebrew for it is Bein Adam or Bein HaAdam, which is like the son of Adam or the sons of Adam, which is like there is a word for just people, right? But they didn't use that. They used like this idea of these are earthly
intentional
creatures, like kind of talking about their mortality.
Sure.
And the idea of like them kind of pulling that and making that part of like what they were talking about here of like stressing like the mortality of, you know, Nimrod even, who in this is, you know, the mighty hunter, like they talk about there, like surely he was a good hunter, you must admit that, Eber. And he's like, yes, I admit that. Which his accent changes there and it kills me. But that idea of like even this great person is still just a mere mortal. That's in the text, and they do, I think, a really good job of pulling it. It's small, but it's one of those things that shows like the intentionality of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that's important to highlight as to what the overall story is trying to convey in the pre-imagination station and post-imagination station portions of the episode.
Yeah, which there is no post, but yes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they're just like, let's go home.
I mean, they do it in the imagination station, but yes. Yeah. And I think while we do these critiques, I think it is beneficial still to like when they do something right to like give credit. Because
for sure.
I will say, well, we'll get to that, but I think they have done a lot right in this one in terms of even what they try and get across and how they do it ultimately.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of very cool distinctions that were made, like you said, that were kind of trying to flesh out a theory of the tower, and that using stuff like, if you're using the word ziggurat, an 8-year-old is not going to know that. But they're going to ask their parents, and their parents are going to be able to pull up a picture of something, or they can go to the library and find something, and you get just you get to bridge the gap of like academic understanding between an adult and an 8-year-old as it relates to a core story from the Bible.
Well, and even with that, like, they call it a ziggurat, right? But they use other words to describe it too, like the really tall building, like that goes up to the sky, or like they talk about, oh, so this is the Tower of Babel. So like when you make those things, like, yes, kid may need to ask parent later what a ziggurat is, but if he's listening to this like in his room
and
or whatever,
he already
right?
knows
Like
the story of
he
the
doesn't
Tower
have
of
to
Babel.
pause it, and he can't like do
Exactly.
anything about it until he talks to his mom. Like it's
But if he was interested in it, he could
can
do
later.
that.
Yes. So I agree.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we get to Nimrod.
Right, which in other things that I like, him falling into the speaking in a foreign tongue, I think is done very well.
Yeah.
It's like
a slow transition into
it's
like
good drama, and it's really well written gibberish, which is hard to
Was
do.
it gibberish? It sounded kind of like German.
It did sound kind of like German, but it's not
I couldn't
discernibly
figure,
as I
I
can
couldn't
tell.
figure out
like,
what they were saying.
Right. But it sounds like a language, which
Yes.
is hard to do.
What I wrote is I wrote German, maybe not a language yet though. I said I get the choice, but why not use like Ugaritic or something? But I guess also using Ugaritic would be kind of a pain in the butt to like
Try and write down
have
and
someone
pronounce.
speak Ugaritic who's not, someone who knows what they're saying. I don't know. I guess he also spoke gibberish and he figured that out fine. So I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, and then what? They just leave, right? Like everyone,
Yeah.
like just
So they get back together.
Yep.
Which is cool. The Lillian is like so annoying in this scene where he's like, "Hey, this is kind of crazy," and she's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, there's only a certain amount of time before the mob gets violent," and she's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "We should get out of here." And they're like, "Ah!" It's like, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" There's like,
well, they haven't had a war since before the flood, Drew.
well,
Nobody
maybe.
knows-
I mean, it depends.
Nobody knows what. No, I mean they literally say that line.
I know they say that line,
But is that true?
yes,
Well,
it's
sure.
But yes, no, I get it. Yes, and then there's the smoke of war. I wrote potentially first war since the flood. Mio decha. So, who knows? I did, like I mentioned earlier, the whole like Yachtali, whatever, the no bloodshed thing, and then the smoke of war. It's like, what do you think is going on? And also, when's the last time bloodshed has stopped God from doing something in the Old Testament?
Excellent point.
God's purposes. Yeah.
Look, Drew, I hear you. I also
It's a kid show.
I was gonna say I also like that they weren't pro like Christian
No, I
uprising.
mean for
or
sure. Again,
religious
you don't need a
uprising,
religious uprising to tell this story, so
So
you don't even need the idea of it. But I get it. Yes, it is good that they say that that's not a good thing. So, and then it talks about the missing element in Nathaniel's, thinking is that human is fallen.
right. The nature of man is fallen, and that means that great achievement is going to lead to great sin.
So I actually liked how he actually worded it. In the
Oh,
thing,
okay.
because I thought
You've got the actual wording?
I thought he did a really good job of putting it in a way that doesn't lead to like violent Christian fundamentalism.
Okay.
Which is, as long as we are fallen, all of our greatest achievements will also be opportunities for great sin, no matter what time period, age, or technological developments. Which I thought was a really good way of saying, like, hey, we have medicine. Not
We also have
necessarily
nukes.
bad. Yes, but with medicine, there is an opportunity for great sin in, like greed, like, pharmaceutical companies driving up like the price of insulin to the moon.
Amen.
Like that's
Wait, you
not
guys are anti-big pharma?
yes.
I feel like
Sorry, Andrew.
Look,
I'm gonna have to leave.
Views of the
Like
Walking Pod,
I
don't
try and
mess-
keep my political beliefs to a relative minimum.
I'm not talking
on
about the stash of
podcast.
insulin in my trunk then.
But I will say, I feel like one of those things that basically everyone except those who own the pharmaceutical companies can agree upon is that is kind of crazy. Just like
a little
pretty
cray-cray.
wild. Like you can still make money. And anyway, so all that to say, I think the point of as long as we're fallen at the beginning, which does point to the fact that eventually, right, once consummation happens and we're, made right with God again, like, then our greatest achievements, I mean, they'll be worship, but they won't be opportunity for sin.
Yeah.
And while all of them are opportunities for sin, that does not mean that every single achievement
Is sin.
must lead to sin.
Yeah.
But this idea that, like, there's nothing that is good that we create that will not give birth to
Inevitably,
the opportunity for that, which will eventually cause the sin. Which I just thought was really, really good. I thought that was a really good way to wrap it up.
Well, and it's surprisingly nuanced, considering in all of our complaints about the lack of nuance in this episode for for
Yes.
different things. So,
Yes.
like, you love to see it. And, yeah, as we are committed to on this show, we must call out the good, even though it's less fun than calling out the bad.
Well, and I think that's
we actually say an oath every time before we start recording.
put our hand on the
Conocratic
Odyssey
oath.
Bible.
Yep. Yep. Put it on the complete guide, just in the
you
middle
go.
there.
Yep.
And
Right hands only. So one of the things I wanted to say is, of the episodes that I've done so far, this one I actually had the least amount of problems with.
Hey!
Wild.
Only took us 5 years,
I know.
guys.
Well, because ultimately the moral of the story is correct. Like that, regardless of how you try and come at it, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's, the more human working together doing a bad thing, or even the Nimrod Marduk situation. Like, at the end of the day, the point is we're fallen, and everything that we do is the opportunity to become sin, which is
True.
That is the point that they
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
And that is, I think, the point of the story in Genesis as well as here. And so I think, I mean, this is the first one where I feel like they really kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of, like, the moral of the story and actually being
True to it, yeah.
yes. And while they took liberties and stuff and they chose a specific
Interpretation.
interpretation of the story, it is one that is at minimum acceptable, even if not my favorite, and is like they played with it in a way I thought was appropriate, as opposed to some of the other ones where I felt like it was like bordering on like really inappropriate ways of playing with the text. Whereas this one was like, they are logically teasing out what would happen if this were the case, as opposed to something that was pretty well scripted in other places, and then they're just kind of
Yada yada.
for the sake of yada yada-ing and making it slightly more fun to listen to. I felt like this one was much better, but
Interesting.
There you
All
go.
right. Well, next year, now I feel like I've been issued a challenge where it's like, next year we gotta regress.
oh, okay. Well, it sounds like that'll probably be easier than hard, because I've heard there's one about children disciples knowing each other, which
Baby
is
John.
preposterous.
Robin Hood and Baby John running through the forest.
That's fun.
Oodaladi, oodaladi.
Golly, what a day.
Also, the narrator lady at the end, the verse she uses is Genesis 6:5,
Yes.
which is pre the
she
flood.
calls
Even.
it out.
Yeah, she even says that.
I'm like, I don't understand why our wrap-up verse is... why this is what Chris goes to.
Yeah. And I did... She said something at the end that I wanted to post to you guys to hear your thoughts on. And I don't know if it was like the third or fourth listen to that I actually heard it and was like, that's weird. Or I don't know how I feel about that. I guess it's a more appropriate way. And it was this quote that she says, where she talks about, it came before the flood. But this should be no surprise, since mankind has always given in to evil, ever since Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. I'm just curious how that sentence strikes you.
I mean, the sequence of events there is interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
As though they didn't give in to evil until they were kicked out.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that. Yes, they did, in fact, give in to evil
In the
in
Garden,
the Garden of Eden. Yes, certainly. Certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, there's...
On like a grand scale, I can't disagree with the statement.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there's always the, total depravity of man and all of that. understanding that would inform, what is humanity's like metaphysical capability independent of God to achieve goodness. Which is fair, I guess. But I do think that, like, there's got to be other evidences in the Bible of man choosing God over evil.
Yeah, I think... So I spent some time simmering on this.
Please.
And I thought it was... At first, I was like, well, what the heck? Always giving it evil? That feels
very
That's
broad.
what I had the biggest issue with.
Yeah,
I didn't even
always.
think about the Garden of Eden part, but that's also a good point. They did it in the garden. But this idea that, like, mankind is always given into evil, I was like, all right, well, that seems a little strong. Focus on the family. What's up with that? But then I thought about it, and I was like, all right, so if I think about this from a more, like, philosophical kind of argument, right? Anyone who is doing what they feel is a good deed apart from God, right, is doing so either from obligation, from the good feeling that it gives them, or
That'd be like
from
common grace, technically.
Potentially, or from this view of, like, it will make me look good.
Yeah.
Right? And the making them feel good I would say it's more of like a selfish thing almost. Like, making you feel like you've done your part or whatever. Whereas ideally when a Christian does good, they are doing it out of the working of the Holy Spirit in them.
To the glory of God.
Yes, which is not
Evil, not bad.
Yes, but it is also not of us, right? Like,
true.
it's it's done of the Spirit.
True.
So
maybe
I think I can agree with this statement in the fact that humans are incapable of a truly good act because
entirely independent of God.
Yes, because all of it is either from God or is from a sinful, like, state.
Yeah.
Sure. Which is where I was kind of getting at with, like, saying, like, from a high level, it's hard to argue, especially because they're saying mankind.
Yes.
Where it's like, it's not to say, right, no one, well, I guess, right. So your argument is that, like, even if you zoom in, you can still make the argument that no one has ever made a good act because the good that we accomplish is not through our own power.
Correct.
Which is biblically accurate.
Right.
And if there is, quote, I'm doing air quotes for those of you who are listening.
Which is everyone but the two of us.
But hey, I mean, that's two whole of you. Who knows how many people will actually listen. But any quote unquote good that is done outside of the Spirit is not actually good. Like, it's not a good thing. It is simply a means to a self-righteous end, essentially.
It doesn't mean good can't be accomplished by those things.
Correct, but it is
the
not.
Act in itself.
The act is not good.
Yeah.
And
there's so much evidence in Scripture of God taking sinful acts of man and turning it into something that's glorifying.
Yes,
to him.
correct. But never once is it like,
no, you guys did it great on your own. You didn't
Yeah.
need me at all.
Exactly.
Wow, we just Holy Spirit got a day off. It's been a while.
since the seventh day, one might say. Boy.
Imagine. I gotta think he's into golf. I don't know.
God is into golf?
No,
Or the Holy Spirit.
Holy
Oh,
Spirit.
who is?
Got a distinct.
Oh, hey, careful. This is being recorded. People can hear this and critique your Trinitarian view.
Oh, well. Oh, God, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, no.
It's fine. We'll tell Dylan to cut it, right, Dylan?
All right, Dylan,
Yeah,
please. Please, Dylan.
I'm on it.
I hope he
Always protected me from falling on my own sword.
part of me hopes he
Absolutely.
doesn't cut it. All right.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the discussion questions yet.
Okay. You want me to hit you
I
with some
do.
discussion
I do want
questions?
the. Well, what did they say is the moral of the story? Do you have that too?
So the theme
Yes,
is
please.
just nature of man.
Okay.
Cool.
But you know what? Again, only one so
Very
far that was
appropriate.
accurate. The other ones didn't feel that way, but this one was good.
So who was the man who came down to see the city of Babel with his own eyes?
Oh.
Well, I mean, angel.
Right. So not a man.
Yes. But that is another thing I didn't talk about. In Scripture, it's not an angel. It's the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that mankind was building. And then the Lord said, behold what they're doing. And then...
So would that...
So maybe it is the Lord. What if it...
So I wrote in my thing, who is the messenger? Is it an angel or is it God?
Right.
But then I thought to myself, well, they use the term messenger
Right.
multiple times, which is the Hebrew word for angel. But
what's the Old Testament Jesus word? I don't remember. But there's this idea that all the angels in the Old Testament are Jesus, or a set of angels in the Old Testament are actually and it's specifically when it's like, is it specifically when it's like the angel of the Lord? There's like some specific
I think so. Maybe,
there's some specific word
indication that it's a
people
higher
who believe
level
that land on
deal.
that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the argument that we're going for here.
Yeah, I mean, it says pretty clearly the Tetragrammaton like a million times in the text. So like it's talking about God.
So right, fair.
Yeah, they only use that to describe Jesus.
Right.
That's for the Father. So with that, I mean, they kind of that's not in there. But
so the discussion question is like, see, it's an angel, and the text is like, yeah, but that's not actually part of it.
It's not what it says at all.
Are you drawing,
why is that the question that you're?
Okay, so that's number one. Number two. Why did God divide up the people of the earth at the end?
Wow, that went from like minimal observation we went depth of knowledge 1 to 4 immediately. Andrew, why God separate all the people at the end of the story?
Oh gosh.
Because they were going to sacrifice Eugene.
Yeah, obviously. God's favorite character is Eugene, and therefore he could not let it happen. So he stepped down and
beautiful
interceded. I don't feel comfortable stating with any amount of authority the will of God, but I'm going to guess it has something to do with his glory.
Seems wise.
right. So the story that we listen to holds out that God divides up the people because like he doesn't like this other god and this dictator who's in charge.
Yeah.
The text holds out that like because the people were worshiping themselves rather than him. Yes. I guess in both arguments it is for his glory. It's because like they have not they're not worshiping him.
Yeah, they're not walking in their identity as image bearers of the creator God.
Well, and I thought it was interesting. One of the commentaries that I was reading on this was talking about
which one?
I don't remember.
Okay, sorry.
One of them was talking about how this was almost like sort of like another flood reset kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Like the people did the same thing. Basically, like flood happened, like a generation or two went by, and then they kind of did the same messed up situation, and then he promised not to flood again. So like instead, he kind of like forces them apart instead.
He scatters them culturally,
which
essentially.
I thought was an interesting sort of way of viewing that. But I do think that ultimately it's because they were standing in the face of God, spitting on him.
So bad call to make.
Yeah, don't do that.
I tend to really try not to challenge deities. Deity.
Yeah, there you go. Yep, I was waiting for that clarification.
Deity.
Good. Yep, the singular deity.
But but all three of them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in trouble with the Trinity again.
Just like that, he's done it.
Wad Fam Chalk Pod 2. Trinity in the city.
Oh, man. What reasons did Nathaniel give for saying that mankind was basically good?
Did he say that?
No,
that
he
was
didn't
my
give
thought.
any reason.
He was like, we can accomplish great things, but I don't
When
think...
you work together.
Right, but I don't think at any point he was like, mankind intrinsically good.
Yeah,
like
I don't
that feels like a question that's missing the point of the episode.
Yeah, I don't think he argued for the, lack of total depravity in mankind.
No, I don't.
I mean, he sort of did by saying that ultimately, if we all work together, we could accomplish great things. So, I mean, in that sense,
Sure.
you could make the argument that he's making the case that it's okay.
what if we
not
all
as
work
bad as-
together
yeah.
under God to
Well, he didn't say
enact
that,
His
but-
great things?
Well,
then-
that would be...
Hey, wait, what if we
That's
unify
different.
the entire world under God with one government, one language,
With
but we're
liberty and
doing-
justice for all!
Right. Thank you, sir.
Oh my god.
That's upsetting.
Yeah.
Yep,
you know,
it's great. Oh man, nationalism never caused any problem.
Not one time.
and the final question here, which is a sub question to question 3, because they only ever do 3 questions, but sometimes it's 4.
Oh.
What did Eugene use the imagination station to show him being Nathaniel?
Tower of Babel.
Locking
Is that the answer?
it in.
They don't give you the answer.
Jesus.
There it is.
Nailed
That feels
it.
safe.
Yeah. I think that mankind is corrupt and
Yeah.
is going
Yeah.
to like not do good things, but like I don't. Yeah, it's yeah.
So
don't
I-
put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your bags in one ziggurat.
Whoops, sorry, what?
I was curious when you guys. So Dylan, you didn't read the passage in scripture this time,
Correct,
right?
I did.
Andrew, did you?
No.
Okay, I didn't know.
No, you're good.
I was
I
curious.
thought about it and then I went.
So I was going to ask. I was curious if you guys had read it.
I'll read it now. Fine.
Okay. I was curious what you would have thought of it in,
In
conjunction.
context,
Yes, with listening to this and also kind of some of the stuff that we talked about. And
Yes,
if
of
it
course.
struck you in a better or worse way.
I think that it's
then-
good that neither of us read it now, that we can read it after the discussion and participate. I don't know. That's just
All right, give me one moment to read 9 verses.
Yep.
Okay, so having read it now, I don't know. I feel very much like my. Granted, this was a quick read of it, but it is also 9 verses, so I feel okay.
It's a quick passage.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like my read is very similar to kind of what I came into the episode with my like recollection of the story. Like I feel like I'm getting a similar thing from it. And a lot of the stuff we talked about, which is like, hey, here's mankind all coming together to like glorify themselves rather than God, and the Lord comes down and is like, yeah, maybe like let's not do that, and like here's the solution is like I am going to force them to scatter through changing language on them, which is like wild.
A pretty devious lick,
Like-
I'm not gonna lie. Just like if we were to sit down and have a conversation for a podcast and just all of a sudden we all started speaking different languages.
Yep.
That'd be insane.
Yeah,
would
that
definitely throw a wrench
that
in the
would be
works.
terrifying, and I would. Oh man, I don't even want to think about what we'd have to do for that to be the like how horrible we would have to be for God to intervene in that way.
The podcast is so bad that God had to make us
Scatter our
different languages.
tongues. Yeah, no, I just see the let's make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. And it's exactly what you were saying at the beginning, where it's like there is a very clear defiance from God's chosen people in this story that isn't necessarily portrayed super well in the Odyssey episode.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Of like it doesn't. There's not a lot of. Well, yeah, it's the same thing we just keep saying, which is like there's something more impactful about like being like we are going to defy God and like raise ourselves up versus like we're going to turn from God to another God.
It's so
we're going
Samuel.
The girl, like, we're going to turn from God to another God. Right? Is this narrative that we get so much in Scripture that I kind of this one almost feels more. I don't know. Feels more relatable in a lot of ways. Where it's like, I think we. Even though
in a more like post-religious society,
right? Even though like there's the idea that like anything you put before God is an idol, but like it's easier to obfuscate the Old Testament people as worshiping gods and being like, well, I don't do that, versus this just being like they made themselves the God, and I'm like, oh no, I do that.
Yeah,
exactly. No, yeah, that we will reach into heaven.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, yeah, we totally did that. We have the internet. Like, we have the heavens.
The internet is heaven.
I don't know. Have you ever been on Reddit? There's nothing bad there.
I do think, I think that that's a good point, in that like, it's easier to identify the bad in some of the Old Testament passages, or even in the audio that we listen to of they're doing slavery and they're, hurting people and sacrificing living people, and there's this evil God and all of that. But it's a lot harder to wrestle with, like, oh, we're just naturally bad.
Yeah, and we're trying to naturally assert ourselves in the role of God, which is
and I think that
insert.
Like you said, it's a much more powerful sort of idea.
Well, and I think there's a bit more of that nuance there, where it's instead of hey, there's the bad other, it's testifying to a unifying human experience, which is depravity. Depravity. All right.
I think that's it. Any like last thoughts, stray observations you've got to get in there before we go here?
I'm just gonna ask if you guys thought that it was okay of God to do that.
To scatter the people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, obviously he's God, so he can do it.
Yeah.
As Christians, we feel like that's probably fine. I mean, but like,
I'm not gonna be the one to question him.
So I read this first and then listened to the story, and I haven't read the story of the Tower of Babel in a while. I'm doing other things.
Bible's a big book.
It is. That's true. 66 of them, actually. 66 little boys smashed together. Anyway,
and some big boys.
Psalms. I'm looking at you.
Isaiah.
So I was reading it, and I thought, like, on my first read through, I was like, wow, it's kind of like rude. What the heck? Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it's rude now, ultimately.
But it's not
It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it's like they were building a tower, and yes, as we've identified,
he could have just torn down the tower. Yeah,
or told them, hey, don't do that.
But it all loops back to the specificity of direction that he has in mind for these people at this time, and the fact that like it doesn't seem like they are going to get there on their own. I think is interesting, and I don't know, gives me a lens into why it went down in like the most dramatic of ways. But it is one of those things where I'm like, there is a harshness to it where I'm like, if there hadn't been this direct intervention, it would have unraveled eventually, right? All things do. Like I'm not like, it doesn't feel like, oh, that civilization was just gonna like continue to be the only one if he hadn't stepped in. But maybe it would have. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, eventually, I don't know. I've never seen anything where I'm like, oh, that's like a unified idea and that's gonna stick.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that might just be us speaking from like a postmodern lens where, we don't really live in a time where there are well, that's a bold statement that I didn't yet make. But like we don't have a ton of universal principles that we assert over all people, regardless of belief and cultural background. The thing that and I don't know, maybe this is entirely incorrect, but it kind of reminds me a bit of Job in the sense where you question God and he doesn't answer you based on your questions. He kind of sweeps your legs out from under you and puts you in your place. Where he's like, yeah, you know, you're asking about why do I deserve this suffering and why is this all a thing that's happening, but you are not me. You can never understand me. You can never be at my level. So I'm like, that's what I'm going to point you to is your place in this, not trying to justify your desire to understand my place in things. Whereas, in this, where it's like, they're trying to come and join God and unify in their best of their human endeavors, and God says, funny, I made you people, and I can just make it so that you can't work together anymore. You know, like if you didn't consider that, huh? That I was over all things and through all things, and that it's not necessarily your business to understand why your wife died, Job. Like,
well, his wife left him.
Oh, that's true. Sorry.
Fair point.
Heresy.
Get him.
Uh-oh.
At the stake.
Phil, what are you doing here?
No, I agree. That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
I thought that Job thing was gonna literally put.
No, I mean it's one of those things where it's like, ultimately we're not in charge, and we like to be, but at the end of the day, we're not worth living. Ultimately, you know, like we have nothing to add or of value individually without God. So I mean, he can do what he wants. That is, on one hand, both very upsetting and nihilistic, but also kind of calming. And,
no, it's incredibly
takes a lot of pressure off. It's like, oh, I have nothing of value that I can specifically add, so, you know, just kind of do what I'm supposed to do.
Well, and God, I think, specifically doesn't put pressure on you to figure it out. Where it's like he like, I think like the passage, like, he will equip you to do the things that he has called you to do.
Yeah.
Where like all good things come from God and come through God, so you can just kind of get out of your own way and let him take over.
Yeah, it tends to be the issue.
Yeah.
All right, Drew, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Not really. So the podcast that I was going to start ended up getting put on pause. It is still in the works, but school is a thing that is happening and takes a lot of time. So
plugging higher education.
Yep. Go grad school. So not that yet. Other than that, I mean, I'm on Twitter at Andrew B. Huber 1. I think I have one post, but I have notifications on, so if it exists and you message me, I will get it and I will answer you, probably.
Okay.
It's
a good call right there. Also by his the merch that he inspired.
Yes.
You know, as referenced earlier in the episode.
You know, you'll be supporting Andrew and Dylan. And
me
Drew emotionally.
Drew gets no cut of that, but he will feel like warmed.
I will feel cool, so that's nice.
Yeah. And
what about Blood Doing Blood? Can he get the profits from that one?
If y'all want to see that merch, you know,
tweet at Drew.
I was gonna say tweet at the Wad Fam Chalk Pod because they're the ones who can actually do it. But you know, tweet at whoever you want. If Twitter's still even there, who knows?
Right.
It'll find its way to the right person. Just throw a carrier pigeon into the wind.
Oh man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Drew. Thank you
being
for
a resident smart Bible person.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing all of the work you put into this, and also being, I don't know, at least open to us putting you on too much of a pedestal. Yeah, because like I do, like because that is the thing is like we put you in a tough situation where it's like Andrew and I are going to be like willfully ignorant of the topic And so it's going to be a lot of us asking you questions, and that's not necessarily a fun place to be in. So, like, thank you for, your willingness to play ball in that way and what you bring to this show. I'm honored to have you as our first 5-timer.
I am more than happy to do so. I think it's fun, a bit of a challenge every once in a while to just have a bunch of random questions asked of you. It's not super on the spot. I mean, I do know what we're talking about ahead of time. I can come in with some prep. Wasn't ready for the Nephilim question because I don't know if that even made the final cut. If it doesn't, this is going to be really confusing. But that was a fun one that popped up earlier, which has nothing to do with the actual story here. But it's always fun. I'm always happy to do it, and it's a good time. I'm glad I was able to make it work.
Fantastic.
We love you. Thanks for being here.
I love you.
I just love you so much. Oh, jeez.
And thank you, folks, for listening. We will be back. That was the Tower of Babel coming out right there.
There it is. Start speaking in German. You've got to do the outro in German, Drew. Or Hebrew. Either one.
Yeah.
I don't know Hebrew well enough for that.
And we will be back next week with another episode and another guest. Have a good one, folks.
Adios.
Shalom.
Wadfam Chalk Pod is a presentation of the Linux Podcast Co-op. This show is a fan podcast and has no official affiliation with Adventures in Odyssey or Focus on the Family. As such, the copyright is ours under Creative Commons. Follow the podcast at WadFamChalkPod on Twitter and Instagram, or email us at wadfamchalkpod@gmail.com. The Tower was hosted by Dylan Weaver and Andrew Acebo, with special guest Drew Huber. It was edited by Dylan Weaver. And I'm Nathan Haverstick, hoping you'll join us again next time for more of the Wad Fam Chalk Pod.